Okay, let me just skip over this, important as it is. Let me shift to climate. You may have heard Barack Obama tried to get climate legislation in the United States. This is one of his two big priorities, climate and health care. He got health care, he did not get climate. The climate bills went to the U.S. Congress in 2009. And in that year, NSF sent me on assignment to work with the committee on the Senate that was passing those laws. So I know the politics of the climate laws better than anyone, because I was working with a senator who worked with both political parties, Republican and Democrat. So we got to see the inner circle of both parties. There was a hearing. Barbara Boxer was the chair. Senator Inhofe was the ranking member. These are the two great antagonists. And I actually was in the room, one of these seats in the back. I don't think you see it in this picture. Major hearing on the science of climate change, what do we know? And one of the Republican witnesses was very skeptical. He said, you people are worried about carbon dioxide reaching 500 parts per million. You shouldn't worry. Don't you know? More than half the history of the Earth, it was more than 2,000 parts per million, and life went on as usual. So why are you worried? That was what he said. Nobody in that whole room knew the answer to that question. I didn't know at the time. But then I went to NSF and found out. The next slide. Okay. I went back to NSF. The director of the Geosciences Directorate introduced a talk. They said, this guy, Peter Ward, is the greatest expert in the whole world on mass extinctions of species. And he mostly talked about the past history of the Earth. And this is adapted from his book. That there have been 5 to 10 times in the past history of the Earth when the level of H2S in the atmosphere and the radiation were both high enough that they would have killed all humans on Earth if humans had been there. This is not a theory, this is measurement. Peter Ward spent his whole life doing this kind of geopaleontology, learning what the biomarkers are. They have measurements of what the H2S levels were in the past. They have measurements of what the radiation levels were, and 5 to 10 times they were high enough to kill every human on Earth. And at the end of Peter Ward's talk, he said, oh, and by the way, I have studied these curves, other curves for these extinction events for years and years, and I want you to know, I have looked at the curves for the last 100 years. They look very familiar to me. He said, it is my gut feeling, if parts per million reach 1,000, then probably the same pattern will repeat. And probably all humans, all mammals on Earth will die. That was quite a meeting. And when I left that meeting, I was shocked. Half the people in the room said, oh, it's just climate science. We know all climate science is wrong. But he had measurements. But they have this ideology. All climate science is wrong. But if you have a measurement. But even more frightening, half the people left the room saying, it proves climate change is real. I support climate legislation. The main thing I learned from this talk is that I am a good person and I can be proud. Now me, I did not react that way. My reaction was, are we all going to die or not? Will I live or will I die? Isn't that the proper way? Will I live or will I die? What is true, what is false, and what can we do about it? So I studied his book, and I formed my own opinion. We know what causes the proliferation he measured. And this is where microbiology comes into it, right? The H2S was produced by a special kind of microbe called archaea. Well, probably sulfonogenic archaea, okay? A certain kind of archaea. And Ward doesn't know the biochemistry of this, but there are people who know what caused these archaea to proliferate. It's basically oxygen and nutrition. And when I thought to myself, well, if it's that simple, if it's just oxygen and nutrition, people should be able to do it in an aquarium. So I did a simple Google search, stinky aquarium. And it turns out that many people with aquariums have had total disasters. They didn't know what was happening. There were parents figuring out, my God, our children are going to kill us. There actually are cases where this stuff has gone wild. There's also the Black Sea, and even the Chesapeake Bay in the United States. The Black Sea is the greatest reservoir of poison in the whole earth. There's a thing called the chemocline, the border between total poison and normal water. It's been rising. The president of Romania tried to create a major international effort just for the Black Sea. But then agents of Russia said, he's rocking the boat, and he got into trouble with Russian agents exercising themselves politically. That does happen in the world. So the bottom line is, how far are we? Two things: low oxygen and nutrient supply. And nutrient supply is already plentiful now in the oceans. Probably we're putting more fertilizer in the ocean now than we ever did before in human history because of what we did to the land.
Dr. Werbos?
Yes.
Actually, it's 9:40, and I think we have to leave this room at 10, right?
Okay.
So I'm enjoying every slide of your
But I should accelerate.
Yes,
Okay,
so
good.
I'd like to have some kind of question and answer in the section, or you may want to discuss more about your experience.
Okay, so why don't I do the rest in like 5 minutes, which is painful. The fate of humanity in 5 minutes. The Pacific Ocean, it looks like we have 40 years left, but we need to find out. So let me jump ahead. Okay, this is my bottom line. In addition to CO2 reduction, we substantially need new efforts in two areas: geoengineering and aquarium level research. This is an area where you could have a huge impact because nobody's doing it. There is a tricky thing because measuring archaea is not so easy as measuring other bacteria. And I remember years ago when Woods Hole first learned how to measure archaea in the ocean. They did it with neural networks. That's part of how they do it. I don't know the rest of how they do it, but I do know that Woods Hole has the ability to assay these archaea, to distinguish them from other organisms. So the bottom line is, it still is aquarium level research, but challenging. It requires technical skills to be able to study what are the conditions for proliferation of H2S producing bacteria. There are people I know who say, oh, don't worry, cyanobacteria will save us. They didn't save the Black Sea. They didn't save us with the previous extinction. I think the chemistry is wrong, but that's part of the research. So we need research in these areas. That's critical. So the people need to know better what the problem is. I don't claim to know. I know better than anyone else, and I don't know. But we need the research to fill in so that we do know. That's what we need. We also need better geoengineering because we are not going to reduce CO2 fast enough. The currents have already stopped in the Antarctic. The problem is too far gone. Reducing CO2 is not enough to save our lives. So we need to develop options for geoengineering. This paper on Akama.pdf talks a lot about the solar energy and about the climate, both. So I ran out of time, but this paper will still be there if people are interested. This is the economics. It's basically about 2 cents for 1,000 miles. So for Texas, you were asking about it. If you can do solar energy at 6 cents in Texas, which I think is possible. It's hard, but you can. If you do 6 cents in Texas, 2 cents to bring it to the East Coast, you can make a profit today in the United States. The main barrier is regulatory. Can you believe it? Donald Trump should stop this. He says he wants to get rid of regulatory red tape. This is consistent with his ideology. And there are ways where the regulations could be changed. But right now you could make a profit, 2 cents a kilowatt hour to bring it to the East Coast, 6 cents to generate, 8 cents will compete for the peak market in the US. Not 24-hour, but peak is a big market. However, China and the Gobi Desert, it's more than 1,000 miles. And it's not 1,000 miles along straight roads. There's water, mountains, so it's possible. Xi Jinping wants to do it. Xi Jinping wants the long lines to come from the Gobi Desert to the whole of the rest of Asia. He really wants that. So it's a possibility. But you understand, it costs a little more, and do you want to be totally dependent on one source? If you're a good investor, you want to pick many sources. So build those power lines, but also build the alternatives. From space, there has been radical breakthroughs in really Japan, but also the United States, in new designs for how you could bring energy from space. From this website, there's a new report. The best cost estimate is 9 cents a kilowatt hour. That's better than 11. That's better than nuclear. The best cost estimate is we can do 9 cents a kilowatt hour with this kind of energy, but the requirement is to get launch costs down to $500 a kilogram. This is technically feasible, but we are not doing it for political reasons. China, in principle, could do it. The US could do it more easily, and neither country is doing it. And maybe they give an opportunity to Korea. Seriously. If you need to be credible in the nuclear area, why not be credible in the aerospace area? You have high technology, and actually the world needs it. I hate to say it. The reason why China is not doing it, they have a big hypersonic vehicle program they're very proud of. You can read of in the news. But their re-entry technique is good for only one shot. Only good for one missile blowing people up. It's a heat shield. It doesn't have the right shielding. The US, there is a paper, if we can go, okay. I actually funded aerospace intelligence systems for many years. And on my website, there's a detail of just how you can get to $500 per kilogram LEO. And it can be done with off-the-shelf technology. My feeling is, with the right people, you could do it in 5 to 10 years. Ray Chase was perhaps the world's best. So this is the beauty of working at NSF. I'm not the world's best aerospace engineer. But through the peer review process, I could find out who was and get a detailed evaluation of his plan. So there's a detailed plan that's been thoroughly vetted by NSF review that would let you get $500 per kilogram LEO. Okay. Well, bottom line is, the technology is cheap enough that if you guys collaborate with Boeing, you could actually own it. And nobody's doing it. Tomorrow's subject, if this works. Tomorrow's subject will be on the IT side. And the IT should include pointers and work. Okay.
You can have more time at the other room.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so maybe well, just one more slide, and then
You can move to the other rooms that maybe like 5 to 10.
okay.
Okay, so you can have
So one last slide, if you could
have
jump
a time.
ahead.
Have a time. You can have
One
time.
more, one 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 more. Okay. My bottom line. The Internet of Things is taking over the world very quickly. It will happen anyway. The question is, will it be good or bad? People do not realize how some of the Internet of Things business plans are very scary. I have seen people from IBM describing their plans. It was very scary. Let me just say, very, very scary. We need to move from paradigms which would hurt humanity to IT platforms which are integrated, which have several new components. We need to move away from old reinforcement learning with a single value function to multiplayer market kinds of things like what we are developing in the electric power sector. The The electric power sector is a beautiful example of how you can use multiplayer reinforcement learning, deep learning for optimization, and use it to implement a kind of market where many human players distribute power. So it's not one big ruler in the sky, distributed power, but also human potential. The new learning will help us understand the human mind better and the better development of humans to be in control of all this, which is very critical. We really need to strengthen the human potential for humans to be in charge of this. We also need unbreakable operating systems. There are ways to make operating systems totally unbreakable. They haven't been advertised for reasons of national security, but now the national security situation has changed. And we need to bring this in the open to build systems which are more secure. Electric power first, but also the self-driving cars, everything connected to the internet. There's radical new quantum technology, which is my personal interest this year. I've put more effort into that than the others. This will give you intelligent systems much greater than you can with any classical hardware. Quantum technology will let you build intelligent systems much more intelligent than any traditional systems. And then there's some robotic concepts of teleautonomy. A guy named Baden has built a human robotic teleautonomy system for mining, which is very promising and very safe, unlike some of these other things which are not so safe. So, I apologize for being so long, but these are all big topics.
No.